All right, everybody, welcome back to Spearfactor. Today, we have Mr. Brandon Zeek. He is a local freedive instructor here in San Diego, and really excited to have him here because he can offer a little, whoops, he can offer a little bit of a different perspective on things, more local perspective than like we had Ted Hardy on here. He's looking at things like competing in these crazy levels. And I know you've traveled too, but I kind of wanted to interview you to get to get a finger on the pulse of the local um, like freediving community that seems to have like blown up overnight in the last few years.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. So to start off with, like we always do, can you get into a little bit of the background on how you got wrapped into all this stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So spearfishing is really where I started. I moved out to Catalina in 2009, Catalina Island, and basically bought a spear gun and bought Terry Maas's Blue Water Hunting and Freediving book. And you basically use that as my reference for anything spearfishing because I had no idea what I was doing. Um, and I moved out there in January, so the water was still pretty chilly, but started shooting fish right out the gate. I think my second fish that I ever shot was like a 6.5 pound calico. So it was kind of super stoked on that.
Pretty
And
decent, yeah.
yeah. Um, so really after that, I had been fishing a lot with my dad when I was a kid. So the fishing side of it was always fun for me, and I think being able to get down there and select my target and then bring it home for dinner was such an unreal feeling that I never let it go after that. So um, lived out on Catalina for 6 years and just kind of really honed my skills, started building my own guns, started traveling for spearfishing, got actively involved with this organization called Diving for a Cause, and that allowed me to go places like Panama, Costa Rica, and Baja, dive with Colleen Gallagher and Terry Maas, and I mean people that just have really impacted the community, either starting in the 60s or even just recently. I've had the full spectrum, so that's been super fun and keeping the fire alive for spearfishing. And then through that journey became an instructor just because I loved freediving so much and started learning and adapting and really kind of getting into the training side of things as well. So
So you're originally from Southern California?
correct. I
Okay.
grew up in a mountain town called Forest Falls, California. So it's in terms of geography, we're about an hour away from Big Bear. So kind of up in that area.
So did you just move down to the coast area after high school or college, or you guys were always just kind of coming down to fish with your dad? You said your dad fished.
Yeah, we would always take a trip down to San Diego and hop on charter boats to go out and rod and reel for tuna and, the whole San Diego scene of charter fishing.
Yeah.
Um, and then after Catalina, I actually did a little bit of a stint down in Panama for a couple months, but then pretty much moved straight from there to San Diego. I had met my wife on Catalina, and she lives in here in La Mesa in San Diego. So um, that was my big inspiration for moving to San Diego, and started plugging into the community down here right away. So
Yeah, it's amazing how women can do that. The kind of
definitely,
the
definitely.
power. So when you were, was there a moment when you were kind of like, hey, um, the spearfishing thing, I'm liking it, and then the free dive. Was there like a moment when you were kind of like, yeah, I think I want to do this, like really go for this, or was it kind of more of a gradual thing for you?
Um, I I always knew I wanted to do something in the water. And in terms of career, became a scuba diver right when I moved to Catalina as well, and loved that. I took a short amount of time to go do commercial diving school up in Santa Barbara. Um, so I went through that whole path and I really loved it, but it didn't seem like the career path I really wanted to take. So I ended up back on Catalina and just loving life out there until, the freediving instructor thing was really a side hustle for a long time, and just I enjoyed it, but I didn't see it going super far. And then, yeah, I started training to be a level 2 instructor because it was just kind of next level in terms of teaching the physics and physiology of that, and then how to get people past that 100-foot mark. It's a little bit more complicated because things start changing at those depths. And through that journey of training to be an instructor, I started really progressing in my own personal training, and that's where it was really like I was hooked on, like, okay, we're gonna see just how deep I can train myself and how much I'm actually going to fall in love with this. And yeah, it's been going strong. I've been loving it ever since. So
Had you done any sports or any athletic stuff previous to getting into moving to Catalina and getting into diving? And
mm, I've always been fairly athletic in just terms of like being involved in community sports. Baseball and basketball were like the two that I did the most. But then at school, I was always the guy out on the field. Even if I wasn't doing a lot, it was just trying to be as involved as I could. So I always really enjoyed the outdoors, and team sports were kind of fun. I picked up powerlifting. Really, it started with more like bodybuilding type lifting, and then I really started enjoying the training process of lifting heavier weights. So got into the big lifts, deadlifts and bench press and squats being the primary focus, but then all the other stuff to what that entails in terms of weightlifting, I got really, really into and enjoyed that. Thanks to my best friend who introduced me to that world. So, um, yeah, and then it it started translating to diving better than I thought it would. And then I kind of gave it up to really train for depth adaptation and stuff, just because I wasn't flexible. So I had some other things to work on besides lifting heavy weight. So,
yeah, you mentioned weightlifting was kind of interesting because I remember seeing Mark Lozano. Is that
mhm.
seeing him talk about weightlifting too, and then like seeing the size of the dude's legs, it's gnarly. How so? And myself included, coming from a weightlifting background, where it's like go big or go home, like lift, get big, whatever meathead stuff it was for college football, and then after that as well. But how do you think that has helped you or hindered you, and how have you kind of managed to mesh that into freediving? Because I was always told too, like the two don't necessarily go hand in hand, or they do if you train a specific way. I wanted to get your input on that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say my experience with it is really just that I keep learning and adapting along with it. So weightlifting, I have found in certain areas, like some of these longer dives, I started doing 55, 60-meter dives. And what I realized is the leg strength that weightlifting had given me, and the tolerance for lactic acid, and just these, probably like my body also um, producing more red blood cells under extreme physical stress. Those different adaptations I had through the powerlifting regimens that I had, I feel like really, really helped. Where I feel like it hindered me was probably going to be the flexibility front. I didn't do a lot of stretching when I was lifting, which every physical therapist I've ever talked to, or anybody who's in the medical field who knows anything about anatomy and physiology, has said like lifters don't stretch enough, which is how it leads to injuries. And it's like, yeah, okay, but I do gradual warm ups. I don't really need to stretch, and I think that's where my mind was at. And then I started diving and realizing how not flexible I was. So I really took a good year and a half, 2 years to really just only focus on flexibility and the depth adaptation. So I lost a lot of muscle mass in that process. Um,
But then again,
but
like muscle requires O2, is that correct? Like, you know what I
it
mean?
it it does, but it also stores more O2. So
Ah.
it's kind of one of those twofold things. I just don't think there's been enough studies done on it with freedivers. I'm sure we're getting to a place where we're going to start seeing more of that. But um, yeah, I think there's a lot of fun things to experiment and try with. And at the end of the day, if you're feeling comfortable on a dive, whether you weightlift or not, that's the most important thing. So
100%. That's what's so weird about, honestly, freediving. There's so many arguments, and I think because there hasn't been a ton of studying on it. It's like we're like this like weirdo group of guys according to the medical field. It's like, you know what I mean? As far
yeah,
as they just don't have enough data points on things. And then everybody's so different anyways, and everybody trains so different. So it's like all over the board, and trying to find like a common mean, or like you're just not going to find it unless you get some vast amount of, subject matter, like data points from
right.
people doing it. So yeah, super interesting stuff though, like because the weight like for the weightlifting, and flexibility, you mentioned that's, where you hear from. And I remember my personal trainer, huh, my trainer in high school, like saying, hey, you're going to have problems if you don't stretch. You're already tight in your Achilles and all these other things. And I was having some issues. And I always remember him saying that because it has bit me in the
Mhm.
ass for the next 20 years. And then we would go overseas and lift heavy and do all this stuff. And then like what I found through the different deployments was like I was modifying the way I worked out so that I can continue to do the things I like to do, like surfing and diving. Um, and it made me realize the one thing is I have all these aches and pains. And then the minute I started going to yoga, and everybody would just bag on me for going to yoga, which, whatever. I don't care.
Right, right.
It's incredible.
Yep.
That was like the one thing that all of a sudden all these aches and pains went away. Like, and I tell everybody, if you want to continue to lift, just exercise in general, like pretty rigorously past, I don't know, 30, like for me, it was like 35 or whatever. It was like, you have to stretch or your body
Yep.
will break. And
Yep.
it's like the fountain of youth, like, you know, um, and it's still biting me in the ass as far as squeezes and things like that. So moving on, you recently had a squeeze. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, sure. So it was middle of December, so fairly recently. Um, and I've been teaching a lot of classes throughout the year, but my personal training, I just didn't do a lot of training dives throughout this last year, for COVID reasons, but then also just because instruction picked up, a lot of people wanting to take classes and learn. So really devoted a lot of time to that. And so December hit and things started kind of slowing down for me. I started making more space for just getting some dives in for myself. And the week before I had the squeeze, I had done a 52-meter dive, and it was my first really deep dive, probably in 2 or 3 months. So I was feeling pretty comfortable on that dive. Felt like my flexibility was still there. Came up not even breathing hard, just like it was such a great dive. And then the week after, I had hit 60 meters earlier, like later summer. And I knew that I wanted to hit that 60-meter mark again before the year was over. And it was like, like I felt so good at 52 and so relaxed. And I really felt like I had the capacity to do it. And I believe I did. I just, there were some steps along the way that went a little awry for me. So get out there and do the warm up as I normally would. And I do set the line for 60 meters, ready to go. And right out the gate, and this is going to be one of those really important things to point out is I did a few packs before starting my dive. So something I've been trying to get used to is packing and then making sure I don't hold tension after packing. So I don't do a ton of packs, just enough to be able to consciously release some of that tension or all the tension before the dive. And I'd been doing that all year in my training, and I felt really comfortable with it. But for this dive in particular, I later on, reflecting on the dive, noticed that I definitely had held some tension when I started the dive, just in the body. Muscles just kind of hold on to some of that restriction. So your body's trying to prevent you from taking too much air in and exploding your lungs.
You're talking about like tension in the ribs, in the rib cage, like
Yeah,
basically when you take the
mostly
breath.
intercostals. Yeah, so just right in here, the thoracic cavity is where
Yeah,
most of that was.
I swear
And
it's like
then,
counterproductive. Sometimes
yep,
when you're trying to pack, like I've done it where I've almost got dizzy and like passed out. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to start my dive where I'm about to pass out. Like,
right.
yeah,
And that's usually due to the flexibility limit. So the more flexible you become outward, the more those feelings of dizziness, will go away because after a certain amount of packs. Um, but just as a little asterisk here, if you haven't done packing with an instructor intimately, that is definitely something that's necessary. You don't want to give yourself an embolism by accident because you don't know what you're doing. Um, so if anybody listening is like, "Oh, packing, I should try that."
not to get sidetracked, but about the packing, but tell her like, why would you
Yeah.
pack? What is the benefit of packing when you're going deeper than X amount, or you know what I mean?
hmm Right. So our lungs, have so much air that they can take, and then that air compresses on a dive, as we all know. So as you get deeper, that space is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. What packing allows us to do is it really gives us more time before hitting our residual volume on a dive, which is essentially like if you were to do a full exhale, get as much of the air out as you can. That would be our residual volume, right? And at some point on the dive, you'll reach that point with your lungs, like if you were to have done a full exhale. So the more time you can put between leaving the surface and getting to a certain depth before hitting residual volume, the more advantage you have. You'll be able to get a little bit farther with the amount of air that you have. So that's the real advantage of it. And it really doesn't become necessary for the most part. Most people I've talked to, it doesn't really even become necessary until you start diving past 50 meters, even potentially 60 or 70 meters. Um, that's when it starts really becoming really necessary. So yeah, I started off my dive with just a few packs. Was holding tension. I was also a little cold. The water temp had dropped a little bit more. Middle of December, it was sitting in the Lohe Canyon. It was sitting probably like 58, 59 at the surface. So not terribly, terribly cold, but good enough to create some chills after a good warm up. And so trying to focus on relaxing all of my muscles just from being cold, relaxing any tension I had. And then equalization has always been a struggle for me at the deeper depths. So just make, like, whenever I try to move some air around at that depth, it always seems to like sneak by my epiglottis and go back into the lungs. And it's like, I guess go back up to the surface, figure out how to hold that better. So I've been doing a lot of dry training throughout the year, because I haven't been doing much other training, based on availability. So I spent a lot of time just with my equalization tool on land, with the balloon, just doing some work and figuring out how to control the air and where it's going to go. And so on this dive in particular, I was really focused on making sure I got my equalization just right, which caused me to ignore the slight tension I had in my body. It caused me to ignore the fact that really I was getting some super strong contractions on the way down. Once I hit 40 meters, I got my first contraction. And contractions on the way down, as I have learned, are a big no-no. So especially when they're as large as the ones I had. But any contraction on the way down is just putting extra negative pressure on your thoracic cavity. And ultimately, that's what caused the squeeze. But, in my mind, I was so focused. My body, I actually felt very comfortable, other than that slight bit of tension from the cold. And it felt like almost going with contractions like I would in a static. But in a static, I don't have pressure changes. So it didn't even register in my mind at that point that was going to be an issue. So my EQ was so on point. Normally those contractions would throw me off, and I would like lock up my ears and I would have to turn around anyways, which is why I probably haven't ever gotten a squeeze in that situation before. EQ work did a good job of getting me super focused and knowing what I had to do. So I was able to equalize all the way down to 60 meters and turn around and come back up. And the dive felt good, no leg burn. I wasn't really out of breath at the surface. Still, I had warmed up a little bit from kicking up, so I was actually feeling really comfortable. And I was ready to do another dive down to like 50, 55, because I just felt that good. Like, okay, let's do another one. Not down to 60, but definitely, wanted to
Meters you're
hit.
talking about. Yeah, meters.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So 100 and the 60-meter dive, 198 feet, and then 50 meters is 165, I think. So,
Yeah, I've heard about
um,
that depth. I have never been remotely close to that, but yeah.
yeah. So I was just doing the relaxing and the recover. I did my spit check to see if I had any blood in my spit. Nothing was coming up, and felt really good about it. So I was like, okay, ready to do another 50-meter dive. And I waited. With these deep dives, decompression sickness is very real possibility. So I wanted to make sure I got enough surface interval before doing my next dive. I think my dive buddies had already done their next dives and were ready to, like, it was my turn again after 6 minutes of my dive. And I was like, no, like, I really need to do my proper surface interval. So why don't you guys do another round? And I should be ready to go by the time you guys, cycle through again. And ultimately, my decision to stick to that plan of making sure my surface interval was what it needed to be is what saved me from really causing some big damage. Because about 10 minutes after I surfaced, I started tasting pennies.
Ah,
Uh, and that to me was the indicator, like, that's usually a sign that there's blood in there. And I wasn't sure where it was coming from or like what was happening. And it was just like a flavor change. It was like, okay, that's weird. So my time was up, and I was like, I'm starting to taste pennies. I don't think I should dive just yet. Give me a couple more minutes. And about 30 seconds after that, I had this like little itch in my throat and I coughed. And it was like a big loogie, just like
oh yeah.
I could feel it just coming up. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. What is that? And I could taste it in my mouth. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to be good when it comes out. So I spit out and it's mostly blood. You know, a little bit of spit in there, but mostly blood. And I was like, nope, guys, we're done, or I'm done. You guys can keep diving, but I'm not. I won't be going underwater for a couple more weeks from here on out. So you know, I'll stay with you guys till you're done. So
Have you had any issues since then?
no. I took the proper amount of time to recover. 2 weeks was the mark. So um, luckily, I had 2 weeks right before going down and doing some spearfishing in Cabo. So it like met with that trip like on the money, and I was like, all right. First day in Cabo was some very shallow dives and only a few, just because I wasn't quite sure how it had healed up. No, nothing deep, you know, 15 meters, 15, 20 meters max. And then only like 5 days. I only did 5 dives the first day, I think. And then I had another day off after that and was right as rain after that. So
Yeah, it's if you haven't had a squeeze, and that was a bronchial squeeze you said, like a throat squeeze,
yeah, it
you
seems
think?
like it was, because it was definitely deeper in the chest, but it definitely wasn't into the lungs. So just thinking like right where the bronchi go into the lungs from the trachea is probably right about where it happened.
Okay, yeah. So, and I've battled with squeezes myself, much shallower. uh, but this is just interesting to me. There's not that much information out there on it, and
Hmm.
I've like reached out to a lot of guys, Ryan Myers, and just asked for their opinion on things because it's scary. Because I mean, people, you know, you could squeeze yourself out of diving, and that's a nightmare for me. But and I'm sure it is for you too. Um, what did you? Let's talk about different types of squeezes. You mentioned bronchial squeeze.
Hmm.
Basically, we got our lung squeeze. There's a trachea squeeze, a
Hmm.
bronchial squeeze, and I remember reading like different types of blood or different colors of phlegm and different amounts indicates the type, and I could be wrong, the type and basically the amount of the squeeze and how long it should be out. Again, there's not a whole lot of research to this stuff, and I just read and try to take as much information as I can, and then from deductive reasoning, kind of come up with guidelines is what everybody's basically doing. Do
Right.
you want to elaborate on that stuff?
Sure. A lot of times, you know, you can decipher the severity of the squeeze by how much blood is in your spit. You know, so I mean that's really the best indicator that we have. Just like you were saying, just because we don't know as much as we probably want to know, and so at least with FII, something that we teach in level 2 is gauging like how much blood is in your spit, and that's how going to tell you how to recover going forward.
Right, right,
So if you're just getting like specks of blood in your spit, it's going to be more blood or more spit than blood. So we usually would gauge that as like a somewhat minor squeeze, take a week off, and then start at 50% of the depth that the squeeze occurred. If you have the same amount of blood or more blood than spit, then you want to take 2 weeks off, and then again also start at 50% of the depth that the squeeze occurred. Um, so, and that's basically the safest thing we've come up with over time at this point. And I think 2 weeks, feeling what the full 2 weeks did to my body. At first, the first day was very, you felt like you did a chest day. You're like, okay, it's like kind of sore, but it's like, okay, it's not that bad. Day 2 all the way through day, I want to say 9, were brutal. Just because it was definitely a large squeeze because I was spitting mostly blood for a good half hour, and so I knew it was a big one. And honestly, like day 2 to day 9, it hurt to sleep on my side. I would wake up in the middle of the night just with like kind of aches and pains if I had been on my side. And I don't wake up for much, so if it wakes me up, it's not a good thing.
Understand.
Um, so, and then going throughout the day, it would like kind of go away. If I was breathing really shallow, it doesn't aggravate the lungs as much. So I would go through the day breathing fairly shallow, but then if I went, had to do a longer walk somewhere, walk up some stairs, and my breathing picked up a little bit, I would be sore for a couple of hours after that, just that small activity. And that lasted for 7 days. It was crazy. It was just like, oh my gosh, it almost starts to feel like the mental part of it was harder, because it's like, am I like messed up for life? Like, is this going to be like a thing that I have to deal with from now on?
Oh,
So
100%. I know exactly what you're saying. It's like,
yeah,
you start to like, "Oh, did I just really fuck myself up? Oh, no."
yeah,
Like, what,
yeah,
especially with the breathing aspect, when you talk about, like, labored kind of breathing, like, that's always scary because when I did a squeeze, it was, there wasn't even there was I noticed when I came up, I had that urge to swallow, and it was, like, all phlegm, but and there really wasn't even that there wasn't really any trace of blood necessarily. It was just like I was spitting up phlegm like crazy, felt like I had to swallow all the time. And then it was the labored breathing for like an hour. Like I'm sitting there
yeah,
coughing. I was like, I'm like, oh, dude. And it's the same thought that pops in your head. A, for me, it's like I did it again. And
yeah,
B, is this the one that's going to just fuck the rest of my life up right now?
yeah.
um, but yeah, so what are some like do you do diaphragm stretches?
I do. hmm
Yeah.
Definitely diaphragm stretches. Those are the best stretches for inward flexibility, because just there's not a whole lot of ways to get things to compress in here. So those ones are really good. Um, like, not even just for lung volume. I'm starting to realize that the more flexibility I have outward, the easier it is to release tension when I take a full inhalation for a dive. So it just became so important to be stretching all of this all the time. So whatever you can stretch, however you can stretch it, as long as you're not hurting yourself, it's become really really beneficial. So
No, that's cool. And then we are going back to the phlegm thing. I've heard too, like different colors of spit indicate
yeah,
like either a trachea squeeze or a lung squeeze or,
the only time you'll see different colors is usually because of a plasma fill. Um, so the plasma usually comes before blood, and that's just pulling. Plasma is what your blood uses to transport through your body. Essentially, that's the liquid part of your blood. The blood cells themselves are actually tissues. So the plasma will pull through into your lungs to actually prevent a collapsed lung. So it's actually something we need to happen when we start getting past residual volume. Um, but if you get plasma fill, sometimes on the way back up, it doesn't always all the way go back into the blood. So you'll get a little bit of your spit will start to turn either that like darker yellowish or even orangish color. And there's a big difference between plasma and blood. So blood's just that bright red, and then the plasma tends to be yellow and orange. And plasma is okay. You just don't want to dive while you're still spitting it up. So if you spit up some plasma, you just take a few extra minutes and then do another spit check. If it's still there, wait a few more minutes. Once it's completely gone, you're pretty much right as rain, good to go for another dive.
and
So
that kind of manifests itself in the lungs or in everywhere, the throat, the lungs, bronchial tubes.
yeah, it's going to be anywhere there's negative pressure, because it's pulling through the tissue.
Okay.
Um, so it could be anywhere. Most of the time, as long as your dive is relaxed, it's going to be in the lungs that it'll happen a majority of the time, because that's really what it's meant to protect. But it'll pull through in all of those areas.
You mentioned when you were doing your dive and you had your squeeze, you mentioned contractions
Hmm.
and depth triggers, we used to call them, or can you elaborate a little bit on that? And basically, anybody that's dive has had this dive that's perfect, and then they dive
Hmm.
again, and they're like halfway down to where they just dove, and it's like these violent contractions. And for the longest time, I kind of associated that to like not doing a good breathe up, where I still had or
Hmm.
had not a long enough recovery, whereas like I still had a ton of residual CO2. Could you elaborate on that? Because I don't even know if that's true. That was what I was thinking.
Yeah. Usually on the way down, um, any contraction is going to be caused by um, our stretch receptors. So we would call that like the false urge to breathe or a false contraction. And that's because most of the time contractions are caused by CO2. So a lot of times, it's like, oh, I'm contracting on the way down. I need to have better CO2 tolerance. And it's like, well, usually on the way down, you're getting closer to that residual volume or you're going past it. And your stretch receptors are telling your brain, like, hey, you need to breathe because we are out of air. So you get this false contraction to kind of instigate breathing. Obviously, when we're reaching residual volumes, that can be different for different people. It can be at 80 feet or it can be at 150 feet. But no matter where you're at, you're not that close to air. So we're not going to be taking a breath when that happens. But a lot of the times when you get that false urge to breathe or that false contraction, if you keep going a little bit deeper, a lot of the times your stretch receptors just give up. I think in my case, I kept getting a contraction because I was holding this tension and my stretch receptors were fighting back over and over and over again. I wasn't allowing them to kind of relax into the situation. Again, this is like all retrospect. Like I wasn't going through my head in the moment, but
Oh, of course. Yeah, I've had it where I'm hanging on the line and I'm like, dude, you're at 60 feet. Like, well, calm down. Like, what is going on? And it's just like,
yeah,
really violent. And I swear it's like, and then I've told myself, you know, pardon me, don't be a pussy, just chill out. And it's then it's like goes away. But it's like it's funny how how the mental game also ties in with the physical, and I don't know which one comes first because they both tend to go swing the pendulum tends back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it's such a
definitely.
weird thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's usually, I know for me, what I've experienced a lot of the times is that mentally, I just come into the game so focused that my body tension just doesn't often hold that much a lot of the times. But then when the times that it does, I think I'm so used to being in a good zone, I don't even think about like resetting my mental zone. So it's hard for me to sometimes figure that out in the midst of it. So it's been a good learning situation for sure. Like, okay, mental resets are going to be beneficial, and sometimes we get so focused on numbers too. Like on a line, I set the thing at 60 meters, and I'm like, I expect to get there. I've been there before. So if something goes wrong, sometimes it's really easy to overlook at it as like, I know what I'm doing. I've been here before. Just relax and get there. And that also would seem to have been a poor decision on my part.
Well,
So
that's the story of so many people's lives, where it's like, with the diving, it's like, "Oh, I'm going to 100 feet today, I don't care. Like, I will
yeah,
make it." At or like you have these goals, these like you said, the numbers, and you have these goals, and you're like, well, now you just screwed yourself. As soon as especially
yep,
being a competitive person, like, well, I did the 28-day Ted Hardy, the freediving
yeah, yeah,
transformation, and there was a lot of it's all dry training, and it was one of the exercises is a max O2 hold, right? Max breath hold.
right.
And it was like the first week, I hit in the fives, and that was like a personal best. And I didn't expect it. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, wow, that's awesome. I didn't even expect it. And then the next week, I had no intention, I feel like, of even getting remotely close to that. It was like a fluke, and I just wanted to see, I'll be happy with this. And somehow, I hit the 6-minute mark. And then from there on, though, I was like, well, that means I can just keep going up a minute every day. And I just totally screwed myself. And I remember
Yep.
talking to Ted. He's like, "Yeah, now you're done." I was like, "It means so much, like everything, right? Like I'm just a competitive person, anyways." And it's like, here we go. And I told myself not to do it. And as much as I told myself not to do it, I still did it. I mean, and then I was like, I'll be happy with fives, okay. But it's so funny to me because number one, I didn't really think it transitioned over to anything. I don't know. As far as like, I was like diving. I went to Baja, and I was diving, and I was
Right.
like, I should be able to stay down like maybe like I don't know 3.5, 4 minutes. Like it's good, It's just I just got to stay relaxed and shallow and see how it goes. No, not so much. Like I did
Right.
add a little bit of time, but it wasn't anything crazy.
No,
Um,
spearfishing changes the game so much.
yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit. I know I want to be cognizant of your time. Yeah, spearfishing is I tell everybody spearfishing is not freediving, and when I really started
Right.
exclusively training freediving, I realized the one thing that transitions over is your breathe up and relaxation.
Hmm.
Like, and you can tell my numbers are shit when I'm spearfishing because I'm not sitting there like worried about breathing up and just, the dive and all that. I'm like, no, I'm hunting, actively hunting. But you
Yep.
can kind of switch some things over. Like I have this like foam surfboard kind of thing that I made, and I use that to breathe up on. And then if you can throw your gun down too, if it's going to be a longer and kind of meet it on the way down. But if you get that first initial really good speed dive down, you can kind of adapt some of that stuff into free diving. But the more you do it, the more you realize it is so different. And it's weird. They're so similar, but they are just completely different.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and you're always disappointed when you go from free diving to spearfishing. It's like, damn, dude. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so talk a little bit about that, I guess, with you. I mean, in your own personal adventure, because you said you started out spearfishing, then you got into free diving. I know
Right.
you're bombing down to 200 feet occasionally, but 150, we'll call it comfortably. I don't know. Um, you know
Sure.
what I mean? You're not hunting in 150 feet of water, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, not
Right.
yet.
Right. That's right. And yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There's those goals again. Anyway.
Yep. That's right. Um, yeah, it is quite an interesting transition when you go from one to the other. Something that friend of mine, Nathan Manata, we always talk about how freediving and spearfishing really do complement each other. Like you almost need them both. I guess you don't need to because there are plenty of elite freedivers out there that don't spearfish. Uh, but really, like spearfishing is such good training for line diving because it changes the environment, it causes different mindsets, and there's a lot of kicking and potentially fighting a large fish on the way up, after you've already had a long breath hold. Even being down and trying to relax, but also be strategic and very tactful in how you approach a reef or a fish. Um, it just takes more thinking power and different approaches just in movements in the water uh, that really make the line diving part so versatile. You're just like, okay, like I know how to move my body and control it a little bit better, and just the oxygen consumption that spearfishing takes a lot of times benefits the line, and then vice versa. You're getting so much time on a line where it's like I can't tell you how much it's improved my mental game like so much, just being able to dive 60 meters in California in December. I never thought that was possible up until a couple years ago. Like I started training for level 2 instructor, and it was like I'm going to stop at 40 meters because that's what I have to do, and nobody dives in 40 meters in California. That's ridiculous. It's too cold, it's too murky, nobody likes it, and nobody's doing it. And then I started diving 40 meters. and I wanted to keep going and started getting really comfortable with deeper dives and translating that into spearfishing. Just the amount of comfortability I have now. Most of the stuff we dive for isn't that deep. We're hunting white sea bass at 40, 50 feet, sometimes in 10 feet of water. It just depends. But um, when you dive down to 60 feet after bombing 200 feet, you get to the bottom and you're like, that's it, we're already here. Like, okay, cool. Guess wasn't expecting that. I guess I'll sit here and look around for a little bit, and the mental edge you get from both in both situations, it's so crucial for us here, at least.
Yeah, it's like with freediving too, is if when you spearfish, like you said, there's so much going on, but you
Hmm.
still have to focus on a dive.
Yep.
So if you can focus on a dive while hunting a fish, while dropping down, looking around, you know, because you don't know what you're dropping into. And that's always a weird thing too, is having that good posture when you're trying to spearfish, but because you got to look and see if you're going to drop right on top of a grouper or something,
Right.
and scare everything down there. But then you go to a line and you're like, okay, so I just swim to the bottom. I just swim down this thing, and all I focus on is that line in front of my face,
Hmm.
and just talk to myself. No gun, no nothing. It's like, well, this is easy, you know. Um, it's fun, and like you said, then there's that mental confidence, and I think that's where the static for me, what it was with the mental confidence of saying like, oh, I know I can hold my breath for X amount of time.
Hmm.
I know I can go down this deep, no problem, without any issue. So we're going to be diving in, let's say, 70 feet. Okay, I should be able to do that. And it gives you that confidence to go into everything. But the more importantly, the thing is stay relaxed. You know,
Right. Yep.
um, no,
Yeah.
this is good stuff. Do you want to talk about? I guess we talk about the squeezes and you diving, and I always thought it was hilarious slash a little wild when you guys were talking about diving. Hey, you want to come out and dive on Sunday? It's January, December, and the water's cold, and I'm like, "Well, I usually surf now, but you diving?" I'm like, "Okay." And then I see Nathan's pictures of him at depth and all this stuff. I was like, "Damn, these guys are like serious about this." Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
do you want to talk about your little meetups you guys do, or kind of for anybody in the area, in San Diego area, or San Diego County? Um,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah. So Chris Cheesem really started this thing called Just Get Wet. Um, Really, it started with DiveViz. If you have that app, uh, they have been working on visibility forecasting, and their motto was "Just Get Wet," and then that quickly turned into a dive group platform essentially. So it split into two groups, and he has these groups that meet up. I think Just Get Wet, their website has the scheduling and what it costs to just have a spot. So they'll have like open lines just for people to sign up for a spot and come out and dive. And then they also run, I believe they run the Molchanov classes through their whole system there. So Nathan Minata and Chris and Derek Rush are the instructors for them. So
and they're doing that
I've
on
had
Wednesdays, right? Is that they still doing that on Wednesdays?
uh, they do the pool training on Wednesdays, right? So they'll be at the plunge on Wednesday evenings. And it's super cool. They've been working really consistently at having a lot of different people with a lot of different certification backgrounds to come be a part of it, and it's very crucial to our community just to kind of keep it going and get people to just have a place to keep getting in the water and train. So that's been super fun to, even though I've been a part of it from kind of more of an outlier perspective, it's been fun to be a part of it for sure.
Right on. Yeah. So Sundays, what time do you guys typically meet up at?
Yeah, Sundays I think they meet up at like 8 a.m. or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, And yeah, it's super cool. Honestly, it's been so important to get in the water and keep keep going forward. In the winter, it's a little bit harder to really hit the deep stuff, just because again dealing with the cold and the body tension. But you can still train shallower dives and get a lot out of it for deeper dives. So while it's cold in the winter, maybe we're doing shallower dives, but we're still working on different things like depth adaptations and breath hold, and physical capacities. And then we're ready for summer to hit and rock it when it gets here.
Oh yeah, nice. So get into a little bit more spearfishing, and then I know you got to go. What was, as far as spearfishing goes, what is, let's say, your most proud fish, I would say, that you've really, like, it really just burns in your mind, like where it's like, yeah,
Mm,
that thing.
oh man, that's gonna be a tough one. That's hard. I've loved a lot of different fish I've shot, so it's uh, I'm gonna pick two if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first one, I love hunting yellowtail. That's kind of like scratching my itch quite a bit of the time. I don't know what it is. I think it's just it was such a sought after fish when I started spearfishing for me. Like I just got to shoot a yellowtail, and then I started really getting good at shooting yellowtail and landing them. And I love the challenge that they can present. Island yellowtail are way different than paddy hopping yellowtail,
Oh,
so that
100%.
they seem to be a little bit more timid and a little smarter. Let's be honest, which is why they get a little bit bigger around the islands. And so I really fell in love with hunting them. I had a chance to go to New Zealand with Diving for a Cause and hunt big yellowtail kingfish out there, and they're almost identical fish in terms of behavior. It's just that the surroundings are a little different. So went out on this day. We had good weather window for getting out at White's Island, which is this island off of the Bay of Plenty, North Island, New Zealand. And it's, from everything I've heard and read, it's like the Jurassic Park of New Zealand for yellowtail kingfish. This is where all the big ones tend to be shot. So we get out there, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, like we're gonna see some tanks, right? And so the first spot we jump in on, getting schooled by like 30-pound yellowtail. There's hundreds of them, and it's like, okay, 30-pounders.
Right,
I've seen these back home. That's not a shock. Um, but we're not here. You can only shoot one per day, so per person. So I'm like, all right, like this isn't where the one I want to shoot, right? Don't want 30-pounders.
right. And you're always
Dive,
terrified you're going to pass one up, and then
right.
you don't see another one. Yeah.
Right. So you dive down, and the little ones stay at the surface. Little ones, the 30-pounders, and the next size up starts to school you. So I started seeing these 50-pound kingfish, and they're vortexing me when I get down to like 40 feet. And I literally had a moment where I stopped swimming down. I looked around me. I'm pretty sure I put my hand on my head, and I was like, why am I not pulling the trigger on a 50-pound yellowtail right now? Like, I'm watching at least 50 of these fish swim around me. And it was almost giving me a headache. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Uh, so I do another dive a little bit deeper just to get through them. I was like, I know there's a bigger one. I just got to keep telling myself that. I know there's a bigger one. And underneath, down, actually almost acting like a grouper, there's these two yellowtail that were easily like in that 60 to 80-pound range. And I was like, okay, that is
There
why
you
we don't
go.
pull the that's why we don't pull the trigger on a 50-pounder, right? So we had the current picked up, and we had to actually move a spot before I got a shot off on either of those two yellowtail. And every dive I took down, they actually got deeper. So the first time I saw them, they were at like 70 feet, and I was like, okay. So I go down to 70 feet, and they had bumped down to like 90. And I was like, oh my gosh, all right. So I go get my breathe up, and I go back down to like 85, and they've pushed down to like 120. And I was like, forget this. Like these fish
Yeah.
are just, they're on me. You know, they know the game here.
Yeah, I'm out.
So we moved to a different spot, and we stayed there for a good amount of time. And my buddy comes up from a dive, and he's like, dude, go sit on this rock. There's this one kingfish, right? And it's swimming around down there. You'll see it. Just go sit on this rock. Okay. Dive down to, it's like 65 feet, dive down on this rock, and I sit and wait. And in New Zealand, they've got these blue perch. They're called blue mau mau, but there's so many of them. So they're vortexing me while I'm on top of this rock, and they're just thick. I can't see anything. So I just like, I can't shoot a fish like this. I have a wall of blue in front of my face. So I lift myself up off the rock because I'm like, I'm not going to stay down here. I can't see anything. And as soon as I come up off the rock, this big tunnel opens in the blue mau mau. And here comes just this, all I see is a head with big fat lips. And I was like, oh, there it is. Back down on the rock, kind of lie in wait, comes almost right up to me, and then just does that nice broadside. And I put the shot through the gill plates. And then all in all, my buddy had to put the second shot in it once we got it about up to the shooting line on the float. Just it was going a little crazy in doing the circles, you know, the pinwheels. But yeah, so that ended up being a 74-pound kingfish. So, and it had just spawned, so it was actually really thin in the gut. I was told that if it had not spawned, it probably would have been in between 90 and 100 pounds. So it was like, all right,
Wow.
there's a good, you know, the meat doesn't thin out when they spawn. So same amount of meat, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good fish.
Well,
And
it's good it
that,
got a chance to spawn too, you know?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that, I think I still look back on that fish as like, I love hunting yellowtail so much that that really is up there as one of my favorite. And then the number two, this story will go a little quicker. Number two is my recent trip to Cabo. Cabera snapper have always been fun for me because they like playing games, and you get this cat and mouse thing going with these snappers. So it's a lot of dropping down, and they figure out kind of what's going on. So they'll move around the reef a little bit. So you kind of have to be a little predictable or less predictable. Got to predict where they are going, and you poke your head in a hole and figure out if they've moved to a different part of the reef or not. So bouncing back and forth, I was able to secure a Cabera snapper on my pole spear, which to me, you know, it's like with the amount of work that comes into tracking down a Cabera in the first place, you know, I've seen footage where they're always like, you know, maybe you get into a big school of really big Cabera and it doesn't seem that hard in some cases. But this was definitely one of those moments where we were playing games and I was able to secure a shot with a pole spear on a 20+ pound Cabera. So
That's
in
pretty legit. Yeah,
in
that's
terms of sense of accomplishment, you know,
yep.
that dive was 80 feet. So I was feeling like, yeah, this is what I love hunting for this reason right here, being strategic and diving a little deeper and all that.
I think I saw the video. I think Nate posted a video of dropping down 80 or 85 feet and seeing the
Yeah.
snapper. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. It's just such an accomplishment. Like I shot this little dog tooth one time. I mean, wasn't even really big, but I was at 65 feet, and you know, I'm not a great diver. I've never claimed to be a great diver, but um, you know, at the time it was like, yeah, 65 feet. Okay, we're just doing drops, but I dropped down to the bottom of a reef, and it was more about like dropping on a coral reef, being in the tropics, being on the shelf of a drop off reef, getting
Yeah.
schooled up. I got circled. I didn't even see them come in. They kind of came from behind and circled up around me, and then plugged the thing, and then come up with it. And it was like the way it should work. But I guess the fact that it just worked the way it should work, and it was like, yeah, I was like being a real diver. Wow, that was awesome. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just a good feeling. It's you feel like a little kid. I mean, it
Yep.
definitely reminds you of like this is why I do this. I really enjoy, and I always kind of compare to like we're in Southern California. We're not really fishing. We are fishing. We eat what we shoot. We're not. Our lives aren't dependent on us landing this fish. Like we are not trying
Right.
to feed our families. So this to the point like where we're on a island in the middle of nowhere. We're doing this for a I feel like I'm doing my part as far as sustainability and all of that. Won't buy anything in
Yeah.
a store. I'll just. But then there's that primitive side that taps into it, where
Yep.
it's like, yep, I can provide. Like,
That's right.
like when COVID hit, and it was like everybody's, what are we gonna do for food? I'm like, we'll be fine. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's a great feeling. And then I feel like too, it also makes you appreciate the animal. Animal gave its life. You could eat it, but uh, you have that connection with your food that all of us kind of talk about too. So,
Right. Yep.
well, you talked a little bit about Panama, and then I'll let you go. But I gotta dig into this with you a little bit. You said Terry Moss. I'm assuming that was when you were in Panama, diving with Terry, or
Yeah. I dove with Terry a couple times in Panama, and he was also on the New Zealand trip. So
oh wow, okay.
yeah.
So I guess talk a little bit about the diving for a cause because I'm not familiar
Sure.
with that.
So, Diving for a Cause is a humanitarian organization. Colleen Gallagher started it. She started spearfishing some time ago, but she lives fairly close to Terry. I mean, she's up in Northern California, but she got hooked into the sport just like the rest of us. And she's also works in healthcare and uh, specifically what she does, I don't remember, but I believe she's a nurse in some cardiac department. Uh, Colleen, if you're watching this, I'm terribly sorry. So we, yeah, she just got this thing started where she wanted to help the communities that we were going down and taking fish from, just as a way to give back as best we could for having these great opportunities. And it really took off, and Terry really started investing his time into the organization, really loved hanging out with Colleen, and they've built a pretty great friendship together. So he does these trips with her that usually involve the bigger fish. He's more keen on like Panama and New Zealand. He doesn't really do the Baja trips. It's not quite his flavor, but um yeah, and his expertise for the tuna trips are always good. So they go down to these communities, they shoot fish, they package it up and donate it to places in the community that are in need. And then usually as well, the organization brings down supplies with backpacks to hand out to kids at a local school, and really like try to impact uh, positively on the community for helping the kids to have something to help them um, through their journey of life, and then giving them some inspiration. We had a chance in New Zealand to spend some time with the kids, teaching them how to snorkel and just getting them like psyched on just being in the water with a mask and snorkel on their face. Um, I think that speaks volumes in terms of what this organization does, just because we're sharing what we're doing and hopefully passing along some of that passion to these kids so that maybe they can provide something for their family in the future, because that's in a lot of these cases that's exactly what they would be doing. They don't have much, um, so it's a great organization. I've loved every trip I've done with them, and being able to share in that with Terry, you know, it really came full circle for me because when I started spearfishing, I bought his book, and you know, he was this legend to me. I was like, man, this guy. Reading some of these stories in here, and then just doing some research on his career was like, wow, this guy like has been everywhere, done everything I would dream of ever doing. He's done it.
He's been through it
Um,
all, the ups and downs. He lost his
yeah,
son.
yeah, yeah.
It's wild.
And so just being able to spend some time with him, one of my more treasured moments. Just he called me up and was like, "Hey, I'm bringing my boat out to Catalina. I know you live out there. Like, you show me a yellowtail spot that you have, and we'll dive together on the backside of the island as a trade off kind of thing." And honestly, that was still stands out in my mind as like one of the greatest moments I've had, just because being on his boat and Colleen was there and Bill Ernst was there, and
Oh, wow.
being in the presence of just these like such awesome people that have really impacted our community so much.
Yeah, Bill at the that sea bass.
Yep,
Bill's,
yep.
yeah,
I got to hear that story straight from his mouth, so that was
pretty
another
incredible.
special moment for sure. And yeah, so the I'm actually uh, from that trip on Catalina. Terry got a shot of me in the kelp beds, which is still such an awesome picture to look at, and he was so stoked on it that he put it in his revised the new edition, the 2020 edition of his book. So like literally
Yeah.
full circle for me, that like the book that really taught me everything I knew about spearfishing. I'm now in it, and it's just
Oh, dude, that's epic. That's
yeah.
fucking epic. Yeah. How awesome is
So
that?
it's so cool, and I think that's what's great about our spearfishing community as a whole is you find a lot of people like that where you just there are people you can latch onto, and they're willing to help, you know, and
Right.
this community just becomes so tight knit, and it makes the good moments feel great for everybody, and it makes the rough moments, you know, everybody kind of will come together. Just like as an example, thinking about our guy that we lost from Spear America, Devin,
Yeah.
you know, that happened, and I think we still feel the ripples down here, you know, and not a lot of people in San Diego knew him, but it was part of our community, you know.
Yeah,
And
I was called like 1 degree of separation. You
yeah,
know? Yeah.
yeah. So just that tightness, and so that's what really, yeah, it's super special for me to be able to have that. So
Yeah, what a credible story. That's great. The book that everybody's read. I mean, everybody has that book,
yeah,
including myself, and, like, what a good read just because all the stories and information, and then
definitely,
there you are.
yeah.
You're in it. It's awesome.
Still can't
Uh,
believe it for sure. So
yeah, it's cool, man. Pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. Well, what a good get with that. Just kind of goes to Terry too, man.
yeah,
The guys that have done so much, they're so humble, really. Like, we have our douchebags for sure, but I mean, in general, there is a ton of guys. You're like, I shouldn't be on the boat right now with this guy. This guy is like,
right,
fucking
right,
Tom Brady of this thing or whatever. Like,
right.
and it just goes back to the whole thing. This is just about we shoot fish. Like, it's
Yeah.
joy being in the
Well,
ocean. That's it.
absolutely. And you know, it's I don't think I've ever said this to his face. So, but Terry is like my grandfather in spearfishing, right? Like he's been there for a lot of moments that have helped me. Like I would not have landed any tuna if it weren't for him. So, he's and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. So
Well,
it's just
yeah, I feel like he has a gift of simplifying things too. And I didn't even
mhm,
talk to him, but just doing his reading, and it's like, yeah, like we talk about all these little things and like certain things with, tides and behavior and all of that. And if you read his book and you are experienced and you read his book, you're like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like,
yeah,
go a lot and try these things.
definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Brandon. I appreciate your time, brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we got to get out and dive together soon sometime.
Definitely.
Yeah. Anyways, man. Yeah, thank you. I got to get you down to Baja too. That sounds like a good trip you guys had, you and Nate. And then I think
Yep.
was Derek down there too?
He wasn't with us, but he's definitely going down with Nathan a lot when they do like Gonzaga and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All
yeah,
right, man. I'll let you know about maybe next week or something if you're dive. If you'll be around, go dive at the down at the shores there.
yeah, for sure.
All right.
I'm always good just to have a dive buddy too, just because I'm like trying to get out myself. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't been
yeah,
diving. The surf's been like 10 feet for the last month. Like I haven't been diving that much. I've just been
yeah.
trying
Well,
to
La
get
Jolla
back in.
Shores is always protected, so I was down there.
Right.
I was there yesterday, and it was flat. So
Yeah. Yeah.
like
I'm just
flat,
like
flat.
so focused on I gotta surf while it's here. Like, you
Yeah,
know.
for sure, for sure.
All right. Take care, man.
Um,
Thank you so much.
yeah, man. Thank you.
Oh, anytime. Anytime. Thank you.